Graham Platner, a rising star in the Democratic Party, just got in trouble for having an ugly Nazi tattoo and a questionable Reddit history. And I'm Cam from Bulwark. I'm joined today by my friend Lakshya, who saw this coming. And Lakshya, I want to give you your opportunity to tell everybody that you kind of told them so, because when I tell people so, I love getting these opportunities.
Well, Cam, thanks for having me. I think around February of this year, I had actually pointed out that I think Democrats in leadership are asleep at the wheel. They don't understand that there is a growing disconnect between national Democrats and what Democrats really want when it comes to what their leadership is doing. So obviously one of them is Democrats don't really realize that their voters are not down for cooperating or collaborating with Trump on basically anything now. That's not the way it was in 2018. But that is the way it is now. In 2018, actually, a majority of Democratic voters said that they wanted Congress to find a way to work with the president. The Democratic Congress leaders, they wanted them to find a way to work with the president. And that's not the case now. In 2019, they said that they wanted someone who could unite the country as their nominee. That's not really the case now. But Democrats are still acting like it's 2017 or 2018. And that's the start of all of these problems. Cam, one more thing is that Democrats in Congress don't really realize the extent to which their own voters just care about cost of living so much. Like, these guys are obsessed in their own little debates about things that most people, frankly, do not care about.
Well, I want to, in this context, get into the Graham Platner of it all, because I think that it's a very important conversation to have, since the future of the party is going to mean figuring out to what standard we're going to be holding different people based on their online history, because the next generation of candidates are going to be people who had social media accounts. And I can't verify this, but I'm also have been led to believe that there's a link between the account that found Graham Platner's Reddit history and Palantir. So part of me is thinking, okay, there are going to be rat fucking operations, whether or not this Palantir shit is true, towards any Democrat, especially Democrats who challenge the establishment one way or another. And if all of the shit that Platner said were a Republican, if there was a popular Republican who had a history of questionable and oftentimes despicable comments on the internet, they wouldn't fucking care. Like, a popular Republican has a Nazi ugly skull tattoo, they'd be like, oh, grow up. So my question for you, I guess before we get into how much are we going to make excuses for, how much are we going to accept, is when it comes to what you've seen with Platner's popularity, how much of it do you think can be attributed to populist messaging and anti-establishment sentiment? And how much of it do you think is just Mainers seeing like a cool kind of badass dude who's like a veteran and an oysterman, looks like you could crack open a beer with him, and saying like, okay, Janet Mills represents all of the gerontocracy that everybody's sick of. And this guy is like a young dude who seems like he could pave a new path. Like, do you think a Janet Mills saying what Graham Platner has said? I mean, when I say what Graham Platner has said, I mean on the campaign trail, not on Reddit. Do you think a Janet Mills with that messaging would be more successful than a Graham Platner with Janet Mills messaging?
No, because no one would believe it if Janet Mills said it. What makes Graham Platner's message so appealing to so many Democratic primary voters is that he is an outsider in every sense of the word. He did not run for office before. He is not an elected office holder. Janet Mills is a two-term governor of Maine. And like, this is the type of thing I keep coming back to again and again. It's about the anti-establishment versus the establishment. Platner, to a lot of Democrats, represents something that they think they've lost. They've lost a free-speaking, freewheeling type of person who used to be for Obama, and then that demographic as a whole really just shifted towards being, anti-institution, really, and like anti-cancel culture and everything like that. And the Democrats are like, we got tarred with too much establishment shit. And, Democrats in Maine, by the way, still like Janet Mills, but they say it doesn't really matter what she says now. Maybe it's time to give someone else a chance.
Well, I'm seeing now when it comes to like people's history, I saw some tweet that was like, if we're really going to be digging for skeletons in people's closet, maybe the 71-year-old politician who's been in office for a while is not the best person to hold him up against. I see a report that Janet Mills pardoned a man she defended in a sexual assault case. Aaron Nichols, who was 20 years old at the time, was charged with sexually assaulting a 15-year-old girl. And after entering a not guilty plea, the lawyers told reporters the 20-year-old client had no criminal record and things happened between teenagers that might be blown out of proportion. We certainly hope the incident does not result in a devastating blow to his academic and professional career, Janet Mills, who was then a state lawmaker, said in January 2002. And then as governor more than two decades later, Mills pardoned the guy who pled guilty in 2003 to a misdemeanor assault charge that drew a suspended 1-year sentence with probation. So part of me is saying, like, what matters more? The stuff that you said when you were not in office or the stuff that you did when you were in office? And I think that kind of puts forward like the two different forms of standard to which we're going to hold people, because we've got politicians who have a long history of the shit that they did while they were in power, and then people like Platner where the stuff that they did while they were not in power is what people are responding to. But a recent poll came out, I don't know how much this factored in the Nazi tattoo of it all, that showed that Platner is still like significantly more popular in Maine than someone like Janet Mills. Do you think that we are seeing like a shift across the party now where purity tests do not mean as much and people are more interested in populism? Or do you think that like the standard, typical, regular Democrat is still going to be able to have a fighting chance, especially if the progressive that they're challenging has been a little dicey before?
I think in general, purity tests are not something from like the anti-establishment left at all. That was always an establishment Democrat thing. That was always something that mainstream liberalism really pushed. And after Harris's loss, I think that has been really discredited because people were like, we kept kicking people out of the tent. And at some point we realized that the tent was too small to win anything. And I think that's kind of what this has come down to. So I think with Platner, look, I don't think that not nominating someone for a Maine Senate seat is a form of cancel culture. Okay. There's one person you can pick out of millions of people in Maine. There's only one person you can pick to be that nominee. No one is saying don't buy his oysters. No one is saying don't have him on podcast or don't publish his columns. That's at the height of cancel culture. That's what was happening to people. That's what liberalism was all about at one point in the eyes of the median voter. With Platner, people are saying now in the Democratic Party, I don't really care what he did or said in the past. I care about what he is now and what he's saying at the moment and how he explains his growth. I think that's a healthier mindset, but I personally still wouldn't go for Platner because I've seen inexperienced candidates one too many times, Cam. The Tea Party of the 2010s had this exact thing. The Tea Party growth in 2014 had this exact thing also.
We don't even need to go that far back. We've got John Fetterman. Who was like the progressive folk hero and is now basically just an extension of MAGA, generally speaking.
You know, if you pick unvetted candidates, this is going to happen. So that's why I'm like, I get the approach with Platner and people are like, let him grow. I don't think you should nominate him.
So what do you think that means in the general in Maine? I want to zoom out after this question to other states, but like, do you think that let's say Platner gets the nomination, cancel culture fails, and we let the Nazi tattoo guy be the nominee? Do you think that he stands better or worse a chance against Susan Collins than someone like Janet Mills?
Worse, I think. And that's because Platner has, really speaking, he has a lot of baggage now that Mills, for all that people say, does not have. She's much safer. She's a much lower ceiling, but also a much higher floor candidate. And Maine is a blue state. It voted for Kamala Harris by 7 points. We don't need to take this chance. And one more thing, Cam, before we zoom out, is this. People always say the Tea Party did great. The Tea Party reshaped the Republican Party, but think about the fact that politics never works in only one direction. I want people cheering for Graham Platner right now to just think about what they would say if a Republican in Ohio came out with a Nazi tattoo on his chest.
Well, I think it's less about what the Democrats would say. It's more about what the Republicans would say. And I think
it's actually what about independents would say, right? We all know that if a Republican in Ohio came out with a Nazi tattoo on his chest, it would hurt him with independents. Why are we assuming this is not the case with Platner?
I think the Platner thing is more like, this is what I've said to people who I've spoken to about it. I think that the biggest weakness that exposes in Platner is irresponsibility and stupidity, simply because I don't think Platner got a fucking Nazi tattoo on purpose. I'm not defending having a Nazi tattoo. I think Platner deserves the shit that he's getting for having the Nazi tattoo. I famously am not the biggest fan of Nazis. I think they're about as bad as it can get. But when I saw that, I've been the target of neo-Nazis since I was 17 years old. I've received attacks from neo-Nazis so many times. I had no fucking idea that skull was a neo-Nazi symbol. I just thought it was the ugliest design of all time. If you had told me there was a scandal based around Platner having that tattoo and just shown me that tattoo, I'd have been like, oh, this makes sense as a scandal, because why the fuck would anybody get that ugly ass tattoo in the first place? But regardless, I have not been provided convincing information that Graham Platner saw this, verified that it was a neo-Nazi symbol, and said, oh, because this is a neo-Nazi symbol, then I'm going to get it on my chest because I am a neo-Nazi. What I got from this was Platner for several years had this completely despicable sign on his body and was not able to identify that it was something wrong, or identified that it was something wrong and just kind of still thought that it was fine, whatever. That's what I'm getting from this, more than this is somebody who on purpose is a neo-Nazi. And that is a weakness to exploit with somebody like Platner. But now to zoom out a little bit, are there states where you think Platner types would stand a better chance than someone like Mills? Do you think, because, again, Maine swung hard for Kamala. I see that. And I see that Mills has won in Maine multiple times. I understand both the pro-Platner and the pro-Mills arguments. I don't completely have a position on it, and I think that's fine because I'm not in fucking Maine. But do you think that there are states around the country where establishment Dems are going to see challengers like him, and the challengers like him might actually stand a better chance?
To be completely honest, I think there are states like Nebraska, et cetera, where you may actually want to take that chance. I think in a state like Nebraska, or a state like, the Plains, where in general there's more weird stuff. Obviously not Platner himself. Don't get a Nazi tattoo, for the love of God. But, freewheeling, free-spoken people who may not necessarily have the cleanest social media history or whatever, but are pretty heterodox across the boat, right? Platner, for example, very big guy on guns. So I think that's the type of place where these candidates could do better. If you want to expand the map, you should be running candidates in the vein of Graham Platner, but maybe a touch more disciplined, in South Dakota, Kansas. Not because you're going to win those races necessarily, but because you're going to introduce some variance.
I think that you can expand the electorate in some states like that. I think that that's entirely possible.
Exactly.
Well, while we're on the topic of Senate, in the interest of your time, especially since I only have 4 minutes left, really quick, I want to get your take on a potential Jasmine Crockett primary run in Texas, because I know that Crockett has said that she's looking into it and that she thinks she would slay and introduce a lot of new voters. And I've seen a lot of people get very upset and say Crockett has absolutely no fucking shot in a Texas general election. Why would she do this? This is extremely irresponsible. Curious what you have to say about it real quick.
She has absolutely no chance. And if she runs, we'll get a Republican for sure.
Everybody, with Bulwark, we're Lakshya and Cam. If you go to a tattoo shop, I want you to think two things. Number one, is this an aesthetically pleasing tattoo? And number two, double and triple check that it is not used by neo-Nazis. I have one tattoo. It is the date of the mass shooting at my high school in Roman numerals. I'm kind of scared that it being Roman numerals might set somebody up to misinterpret it, but fortunately it's very verifiable. 2/14/2018. Thank you all for tuning in. Vote Tallarico as far as I'm concerned. See y'all soon.